Hi, this is Cameron from ZappyRide, and you're watching ZappyCast. ZappyCast is an omni-channel media production brought to you in part by ZappyRide that focuses on collaboration and conversation with the brightest minds in the EV space. Each episode will focus on different themes going on within the electric vehicle space right now. In each episode, we'll bring on guests from their relevant industries to talk about what's going on, to provide insights, knowledge, news, and talk about what's going on in the world of EVs. We look forward to you joining us for this ZappyCast. Enjoy. Hey everybody, this is Cameron from ZappyRide, and you're listening to ZappyCast. In this session, we'll be covering the utility's ever-expanding role in EV adoption and future considerations when it comes to the utility's role. Today, we're joined by Karl Popham. Karl leads the electric vehicles and emerging technologies team at Austin Energy since its founding in 2011, whose program is recognized as the Drive Electric Utility of the Year by Plug-in America and EV Visionary, a visionary city of North America by the Electric Drive Transportation Association. Karl is a great friend of ours at Austin Energy, and we are more than pleased to bring him on. And Karl, thank you so much for joining us. Really looking forward to learning a bit about what Austin Energy's done and how you guys are leading the space.
Thank you for having me here on the show, and thank you for being a collaboration partner in our efforts here at Austin.
Thank you. And we're also joined by Olivier. Olivier is the CEO of ZappyRide, and two meeting of the minds here. Great EV conversation to be had, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing what will be said. So without further ado, Olivier, go ahead and lead us off here.
Thank you, Cameron and Karl. Great to have you. I think we have been aiming to have you on this podcast for a little while. I'm glad this is now happening. So today's conversation, Karl, I think will really span the whole gamut of what utilities are doing with regards to EVs, and in particular, what Austin Energy is doing with regards to EVs. I've always considered personally that Austin Energy is one of the leaders in the space, and the numbers or some of the facts that Cameron quoted, really go in that direction. I think a lot of recognition in this country that Austin is leading the charge as far as what utilities can do to promote EVs. So I'd love to get started with just for the collaboration we have going on. ZappyRide is proudly running, I should say, the Austin Energy Buyer's Guide for EVs. So starting from that partnership that started a few years ago now, can't believe it, I'm saying this, but it's been a while. Austin Energy has been leading the charge as far as educating residential customers on EVs. Could you perhaps tell us a bit about how that came about and how you got to that realization that your customer needed education and engagement?
Well, certainly. Well, I would say I'd first frame it in our overall larger strategy. So Austin Energy, we are the third largest city-owned utility in the U.S. We are city department. I'm a city employee. And so we've been in business as an entity since 1895. So we're very community focused. We think long-term and strategic. That's just part of our culture and our vibe, if you will. And at Austin Energy, we have what's called the 5 EV pillars that we think is a comprehensive way, a holistic way for a community or for a utility to think wide. And one of the key 5 pillars is outreach and education. So that's always been a core component of our strategy. I would even go so far, and I talk to a lot of utilities that are just starting to get into the EV business, if you will, is where should I start? I always say start with your own strategy and make it public. So now you're invited to the table. And also your outreach and engaging your customers to just double checking what your community needs. So all that falls kind of within the buyer's guide, all within that framework, if you will. So we've known for a while, and this is an industry known for a while, that EVs, especially several years ago, but continue today, just didn't get the same love and attention at the local dealership level, the traditional dealership level, as the internal combustion engine, as these big trucks and SUVs, et cetera, were getting. And it was just causing a barrier at a key point of the consumer buying process, the point of sale. We also had a friend of the show named Amy who hosts a local radio show and has a environmental focused blog, etc. And she shared her own experience, and her blog was titled I tried to buy an EV in Austin and couldn't. And just the terrible misinformation, the misdirection, the whole litany of things that have been reported again and again were happening to her. And she ultimately had to go out of market and she was determined. Most customers aren't going to be that determined. They might be somewhere on the scale. They're kind of interested and you can get them over the line, but they're not just going to be, I know this is exactly what I want, and they're going to have the perseverance. So we really realized that as a barrier. And then when we had an opportunity to put together a program for a Bloomberg Cities Challenge grant, we decided, let's go ahead and let's change this barrier and make it a positive. So that's kind of the background of why we launched the project to begin.
Thank you. Yeah, and history again is an interesting. The perspective that we have now is really interesting because it's been a couple of years, and I remember when we launched it, it was highly supported by the city of Austin, but we had I think pretty low volumes of customers who are using the buyer's guide, and that's ev.austinenergy.com, by the way, for those who are not familiar. Has now really skyrocketed. I think we had a 200% increase in the recent past. So could you speak to how that landscape looked a few years ago versus what it looks like today with the increased volumes of interested customers?
Yeah, and to your point, we've just seen really great numbers and metrics. One of the key metrics we look for is unique visitors to ev.austinenergy.com, to your point. So how much of an impact we're having in Central Texas and driving sales volume. And we really didn't have, I guess part of the secret sauce of working at the city of Austin Energy and having such a comprehensive 25 active initiatives under this 5-pillar strategy is we don't always have to know what is going to automatically work out of the gate. We do pilots, we try, we take risks, and this was one of them. We really didn't know what success looked like other than let's see how many auto dealerships we can kind of engage in the process and pull them in the fold as a key stakeholder, because ultimately it's their business to sell cars. It's not the city of Austin, and it's definitely not the utility to sell cars. So the most recent numbers now is we're getting over 10,000 unique visitors a month to a Austin area guide for EVs that registers about 1,000 EVs a month. So we're sending a sales funnel of 10 to 1 through the dealerships of unique visitors coming to the buyer's guide. And the buyer's guide, what I think makes it unique is phase 1 was general information and all about the vehicles and calculators and great stuff. But then we ramped up to a version 2, which has the real-time inventory, new and used, at the local dealership. So not can only someone can see the calculators and the programs, they can see this color, this cost. Oh, here's a low mileage. I just recently looked at the buyer's guide. There's several great used EV commuter cars for $7,000, $8,000, $9,000 under that $10,000 mark. And these are great vehicles, as well as all the new vehicles coming online. Most recently, we're seeing upticks when we run a campaign around promoting the buyer's guide. We can get 1,000 unique visitors in a day is what we're seeing spiking right now with a good campaign. So there's definitely a lot of interest. And it's also, I think, one of the key reasons is Austin relates to a little over 20% of the Texas market, even though it's only a little over 3%, 3.5% of the population. The county in Austin is the highest county of EV adoption in all of Texas. So I think, thanks a lot to the buyer's guide and other programs and just the culture of Austin, I think, and working with, I think all that comes together to really put Austin in that leadership position and identifying very early that the point of sale is so critical, because when someone makes a car decision, they're kind of locking that in for about 10 years, whether themselves or the secondhand market. So we really wanted to, front load that decision-making process and not lock people into another 10-year decision on internal combustion engine, but give them as many tools and as ease as possible. And I'll say we went live almost right before the pandemic. So that was also an interesting timing. And in some ways, maybe very well timed, because what we saw is people didn't want to go into the traditional car buying business model. You go in, you're greeted by a random person on rotation on the sales floor. You're supposed to drink coffee there. You might wait there a couple hours while they sweat you out on price. And now you're in this environment and you might not be feeling safe, and you're just not getting out as much. So by putting that as an online presence, you could just click, and then through relationships with generally it's the local internet sales manager or the sales manager, or they identify a key person, you can just have that, you can pick the car kind of remotely, just have it ready for you to go. And so you can be very quick, in some cases even delivered. So you just have a model which frankly looks more like the customer experience people were getting when they're buying Teslas. A lot of information online, order online, that kind of stuff. We kind of gave that framework, if you will, for the traditional local dealership who were still struggling. A lot of them were still struggling to sell EV units out of the door effectively.
Yeah.
And it's success breeds success. The more you sell, the more they order, the more they order, the more they sell. And so it just really just starts success to domino effect in driving EV adoption by just getting over that first hump of having a better customer experience at the point of sale.
That's wonderful, and we see this in a couple other markets where we work. One thing we hear quite a bit from utilities is that it's difficult to set up an effective education and outreach program, and they face a lot of obstacles. I was curious, in looking at your own trajectory, what kind of obstacles did you face from stakeholders, from management, from whomever, and what advice would you have for other utilities that try to replicate your success?
Well, the number one obstacle I see with my friends at other utilities is frankly paralysis by analysis, really wanting to rethink over. And even more so with investor-owned utilities, we're step one on innovation to a lot of my friends. I talk at investor-owned utilities, so we're public power, so we're governed a little different. Our metrics are community-based, and the investor utilities typically say, well, step one when we have an innovation is we bring in the rates team is how we're going to rate base it, and bring in the lawyers and how we're going to convince to, step one is how to pay for it. Where when you're running pilots at a city department, we have other drivers around, for example, the Austin Climate Equity Plan. We might propose a pilot that, we are still figuring out the business case, but according to the Austin Climate and Equity Plan, one of the key drivers there is by 2030, 40% of all vehicle miles traveled in Austin will be on the electric platform to achieve our sustainability and clean air and climate equity goals. And so we're saying, well, here's a pilot and here's what it's going to look like. And this is the outcome we really want, is to drive this 40% VMT. And then along the way, we also then work on the business model. So I think one is we have a different go-to-market, just almost an innovation culture ecosystem. But two, I really think it's about, at some point you have to do something. And sometimes when I publicly speak, I end on a saying called Essayons. And my first job out of college was I was a young lieutenant in the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And the Corps of Engineers saying is called Essayons. And Essayons is a French word for let us try. And at some point, and that has just guided just me as a person my whole life of at some point, you just got to try, and you have to not be afraid of failure. But I would even, argue when you're doing innovation, and EVs for electric is a lot of innovation, I think it's almost hard to define what failure is. Maybe the pilot doesn't go to scale, but now you've learned what works and what doesn't and gotten customer feedback. So version 2.0 then can hit it out of the park. So I'd also say I would be very open to defining failure when you're running an innovation program. And I also think utilities as a culture, every organization has strengths and weaknesses. Traditional utility strengths are traditional engineering, safety, reliability. What it's not is innovation, R&D, new business models, marketing. That is not the core utility. Now, there's some who, there's exceptions to every rule. So at some point, you have to kind of embrace some new thoughts and thinking, and also remove some of the ropes that you might have tied to you, because we've always done it this way. And a lot of utilities like to plan and forecast based on historically what has happened in the past versus looking at the major factors and disruptors, whether you like it as not as a utility. And I would say EVs are happening whether you like it or not as a utility. It's not in your control, and utilities don't like things that they're saying, that they're not controlling. Engineers don't like that. And there's a lot of engineering culture in utilities. So at some point, try Essayons it, let us try, and do not be afraid of failure. And also I would say I would redescribe what success and failure looks like when you're trying to innovate.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And we see this also in some of the more the most successful teams out there, that let's try it approach. And yeah, piloting and trying different things makes a lot of sense. So we talked about your successes on the residential side, passenger vehicles, but of course the other big half of EVs is the commercial side and infrastructure. And we hear, quite often folks in the development space who try to develop charging stations, new sites, struggle with their utility interaction. And I hear that there's some good news coming out of Austin when it comes to these interactions with developers. So could you paint that picture of how you see broadly your role in facilitating infrastructure, whether it's for public charging, workplace, fleets, what successes you've had, and how you see the future?
Yeah, I think so. There's so many opportunities for fleets. A lot of the fleets are already, because consumers look at MSRP, fleets look at TCO, total cost of ownership. And we're already seeing great total cost of ownership advantages in a lot of fleets going to electric. So our most active fleet projects right now is Cap Metro, our local transit. We did finish the design and phase 1 development of a 200 electric bus depot in North Austin. And they have made the claim they'll never buy a fossil fuel bus again. So they're rapidly inputting in electric buses, and 2 of the rapid transit lines by FY23 will be all electric. And that will probably include in-route charging as well, as just an overall strategy. We are also electrifying our own city fleet. So that's a lot of light duty. And our goal there, our initial goal was to save the city $3.5 million over a 10-year period under TCO. We're going to hit that 3.5 million savings a year and a half early. And by the 10-year mark, it will almost be doubled, 7 million in savings. So we're also, but it's also important to us to have a leadership position. It's one thing to say, have these goals, 40% VMT and EVs and climate, and your citizens are seeing all these diesel and gas vehicles with city logos driving around. So I think it's also about a leadership position. And when we were first launching our fleet, some of the first responders were a little hesitant. The police and also the fire, they're now on board. So they're very popular with some of the first responder lieutenants, as well as getting involved just overall. So I think tackling fleet is you have to be aware of what you can do and have programs. So one of the programs we do have for either infrastructure or fleets is once again, it's a pilot tariff. Let us try, and then let's get the data on it. And a pilot tariff that we've launched, if you're doing for fleet or public infrastructure, is you can qualify for a tariff rate that puts your energy charge at 0.0. So it's replaced with a fixed charge. So why do we do that? We do that is because we want to encourage high efficient use of chargers. The worst thing you can do to a utility is set up a charging model, and 22 hours out of the 24-hour day, nothing's happening. And then you're just going to, juice whatever you're juicing for 2 to 3 hours a night. And how utilities compensate you for that behavior is called a demand charge. Demand charges are levied if you're needing a huge pipe, but you're only turning it on for a limited time amount of the day. That's the whole purpose of a demand charge, is to recoup that cost. So we decide, well, let's just get rid of the shackle of an energy, 0.0. So then you really get fleets saying, well, how can I keep electrons flowing as much as possible? And that's the behavior we want to see, and understand a business model where I'm constantly charging. Because when it's 0 and you've already paid for it, people are kind of motivated to figure out, now you're leaving money on the table. In this case, electrons in the hose. I don't know if that's a good analogy or not. And maybe we'll edit that one out.
No, it's a good one. I like that. I think it helps, right? A lot of people are in the fleet side. People are used to gasoline and diesel. And I think the more we can help them bridge from that world to electricity with analogies and so forth, I think it's actually helpful.
Certainly. And I'm kidding as well. I don't think. So I think there is a lot of opportunity to partner with fleets. We're seeing more products coming online. Tesla's announcing a pretty exciting, long haul electric platform. But there's also, for utilities, there's a lot of opportunity and risks. And it's working with the customer, because there's a difference to maybe putting in a 12 megawatt fueling depot in North Austin is a completely different opportunity and potential burden to the local utility than putting that same in the middle of nowhere, Texas. that doesn't have all the lines and infrastructure. So then you have to be a little more creative. So with the way how electricity works is not all sites are created equal. Not all utilities are set up accordingly. So my number one advice with a fleet is work with utilities as soon as possible. We are seeing continued longer schedules in the delivery of infrastructure. There was a survey recently released by the American Public Power Association showing turnaround times dramatically increasing just across the industry. And I've seen that here in Austin. So kind of to your thing, something we just got word on this morning. So we're breaking it live on your podcast. I don't know when you drop it. But one of the things that we wanted to speed up is permitting on EV infrastructure. So through a process my team worked with on our local permitting department is we are potentially dramatically decreasing that part of the chain. And I'm going to go ahead. I'm looking up so I get the exact amount. So launching in a few days. Is what's called the new commercial EV process. And so we're going to be training installers and the general infrastructure community on that on December 6th. But there will be more of these free workshops and information. But it's a streamlined process that by meeting the prerequisites and requirements, your permit can be processed in 3 to 7 business days. That is a huge turnaround time compared to when you're just rolling in traditional building permits. And that's what was happening. That's what's happening in most places across the country. Your permitting is being compared to a commercial building, an office building, a residential tower. Your charging hub based on the power requirement, everything is going through the same amount of paperwork and permitting as if you're building a 50-story building downtown. So of course, that's going to have a lot of oversight and a lot of checks. But we think infrastructure has come a long enough way on EV charging where it doesn't need that same amount of oversight, if you will. We can have expedited and lean methodologies to get more infrastructure because it really is a repeatable type of program, unlike, every building is unique and there's just a lot more going on to it. So I think that will help, but there's also other things impacting schedule, supply chain, and this is globally where you can even look at what's happening in Ukraine and just inflation and cost of materials. We are also seeing shortages in power system engineers and other key staff, professional staff that help process electrical permitting. And so it's just all coming together, in one thing. And my number one advice is work with utility as early as possible to help you not only so you can get in the queue, but if you're still under site selection, you might avoid an unintended consequence and delay by realizing, basing on where you're siting it and how the electrical infrastructure or the grid's working in that area, that may be an awesome site or it may be a terrible site for reasons that your electric utility provider can help you with.
Yeah, and just to put context, do you have any sense of how long permitting took before we're shrinking it now to 3 to 7 days?
A lot longer than that. Mm-hmm. So what we're seeing for the overall process, an expedited emergency power from start to finish can take 6 months, a normal turnaround time, 12 plus months from when you have your site and you get in the queue of how long it's going to take that infrastructure to go live, to go through the city permitting, electrical permitting, construction, everything that's involved is how long it takes. So this is a key part of that. So that will drastically simplify and reduce a pretty major barrier. So it's significant, but there's still other issues at play. Yeah. Supply chain, power system engineers to review. There's still a lot of stuff going on, but we'll take the wins as we can get them. And it's all critical path. There's a lot of stuff that's critical path, meaning you do step 1, then you get to go to step 2 and then step 3. It's not like 1, 2, and 3 can all run in parallel. Like this group wants to see that permit first before then they do work. And so by taking that much time out of a critical path activity, like a city permit, a city building permit is huge. We still have work to do, but I'll take the wins in Austin as we can get them. We'll chalk that up as a step forward, but there's still so much to do.
It is massive. I mean, I think this is really a big step forward. I remember seeing a couple of years back, there was a report by Electrify America. They're of course installing chargers all over the country, and they were benchmarking across states and utilities, and the variability was massive. Some were able to deliver it, to your point, in weeks. Others was months or even years. And so I think a lot of people will learn from you here on how we shorten these permitting timelines. It's very, very exciting.
Yeah, we saw similar issues and continue in solar installations. It's really different on what region or what area you're trying to install in. And I've talked to quite a few different external installers of infrastructure because we're open for business. If you want to put charging hub, any infrastructure in the Austin, please do. So we will help to facilitate and wrap, because it wasn't that many years ago, there was a shade of gray. Can a public power have third-party aggregators? And according to state law, PURA, is that a violation of the sole right and obligation to serve electric service in your territory? So we changed city code to clearly allow it, and the state legislature caught up as well. And then so that at least nuance is gone. So we're definitely open for business, and we'd love to have third-party infrastructure providers put more infrastructure here for our residents. But and I think this was a fair assessment. I talked to one of the largest ones and asked, well, how is the city of Austin do in comparison? Because they've been putting installations all over the U.S. And I think he said, well, overall pretty good. Not the best, definitely not the worst. Overall pretty good. And I'll take overall pretty good as pretty fair from a scheduling process of where our infrastructure and speed to delivery is. Hopefully, things like this recently announced accelerated lean methodology for the the building permitting process will start trending us up. But I think that's a fair assessment of where we've been in scheduling of deployments. The good news is, even though we're a city department, we have to follow the same process. We do our own infrastructure. We just not that long ago launched 30 DC fast and install. We do the install for city fleet, and so we own and operate our own, as well as we work with hosts as well to put in their infrastructure, and then we rebate it and help operate it. So it was also like in our own personal best interest. Well, and so we knew it. We had a team of project managers who really knew the system, had to go through it like everyone else. But being a city department, that gave us competitive advantage to collaborate as peers. Well, how can we, not just help us, and because we were already doing things that were just kind of helping us, but how can we institutionalize this to help everyone in this space? And that is what we originally kind of launched today.
That's wonderful. Do you see fleets making decisions on where to install their charging, and based on the fact that you have streamlined processes and high quality customer service, they're deciding to go to Austin and install their charging infrastructure in Austin as opposed to, I don't know, Dallas or Houston or other places in Texas or other places in the country?
Well, I've talked to a lot of different fleet managers across the U.S. And, one of the reasons why we did our pilot tariff is to further attract and have incentives for fleets to electrify. And what I heard was this. One is a lot of the big national brands are first going to electrify in ZEV mandate states or other state mandates that are kind of requiring them to do it, where they get more state level incentives or aligned. But we are starting to see more interest here locally level, in Austin, Texas. So we also, I think, somewhat unique about Austin is we have published the Austin, what do we call it? The Austin Strategic Mobility Roadmap. And what the Austin Strategic Mobility Roadmap is looking at the next generation of transit mobility as being shared, electric, and autonomous. So that has helped us work with some of the autonomous robo-taxis, which we're actively working with today and accelerating their deployment in Austin, as a way to proactively partner with new mobility choice and new fleet choice. That includes autonomous, but to our roadmap, it's shared electric and autonomous. We like all three of those working together. Some of the companies only hit 2 out of the park, where we would like to see all 3. And so we already set the framework working with the city to be very open and agreeable on how to accelerate your deployment here in Austin. So I would say it's kind of taking a wide view and a customer-centric view of what are they trying to do, what are they trying to get in here, and taking a critical self-assessment. Are we a barrier to this organization? Are we an accelerator, or are we just heads in the sands adrift and it's either happening or not? And just being honest and saying, well, how do we move to being an accelerant for these new mobility choices? And the Austin Strategic Mobility Roadmap is one of those ways to get the stakeholders in the room up front, the policymakers, the different city departments, the industry, even academia, a bunch of stakeholders together on, we want to be an accelerator, and here is where we need to do better to make sure we're helping and not hindering these new business models or technologies.
Yeah. And speaking of business models and innovation, just want to go back a little bit to rates. Clearly, most fleet managers are not familiar with electric rates. They think it's very complicated. It's time of use at times. A lot of complexity there. I just wanted to, go back to the rate that you mentioned, which sounds extremely innovative, and maybe dig a little bit deeper to make sure the audience really understands what you've designed and why. But also more broadly, look at the rate design landscape for commercial EV charging fleet and so forth, and hear your thought about where the industry is headed, whether there's a consensus forming or if it's still, people are trying a lot of different rates and trying what's figuring out.
Yeah, I think there isn't a consensus yet, but we're getting there. And let's talk about a few rates. So one of our consumer rates for level 2 is if you subscribe for a minimum of 6 months, you can charge all you want at about 1,400 charging ports in Austin, level 2, for $4.17 a month. And so that's an innovative fixed rate. This also allows utilities the thing about transportation electrification, for utilities, it's a great way to try new business models outside of the volumetric kilowatt hour pricing. Utilities been moaning that the majority of costs are fixed, but we're still stuck in volumetric, almost like cell phones were with, per minute plans. I mean, who does a per minute plan anymore? I don't know who does anymore. And I think we're still stuck as an industry in the per minute plans. And this is a great way to dip your toe into fixed things like 417 unlimited charging a month, or a 0.0 energy charge that's replaced with a fixed charge. Other ways to promote behavior as utilities than the traditional minutes or kilowatt hour pricing with a demand charge overlay if you're a commercial customer. The other one I see in DC Fast is minutes versus kWh as being a debate. Not only debate is which is better, but what should be legally allowed. So California is going all in on political policy landscape is kilowatt hours is the winner. Our DC fast charging is per minute, 21 cents. And the reason why we do per minute here in Texas, or at least here in Austin, is we're trying to influence behavior. One is we want to keep it simple and everyone can understand per minute. But more importantly is we don't have enough infrastructure to go around. If you have unlimited infrastructure, sure, per minutes is fine. But what we found is when a car gets to about 80%, it takes your very expensive, I don't care if it's a 300 kW, $300,000 on up infrastructure port. When it gets to 80%, it's going to send a signal to protect its battery and turn that into a 6 kW, trickle in comparison, level 2 charge.
Yeah.
And so if you're only charging per kilowatt hour, people know that. And now they look as this is a nice parking space for me. And the average time on a DC fast when you're per minute or per kWh is going to be closer to 50 minutes. If you're per minute, it's going to be closer to 17 minutes. That's how big of the gap is to get that last 20%. So when we look at customer experience, it's not just the customer experience at the pump. It's the customer experience of how far of a line you're waiting in to get access to it. And we think by doing per minute, people get off quicker and then it frees it up so the next person that comes in can get a chance. To give credit to the California law, they do allow what's called idling fees. And that's something when we first did a lot of research in minutes versus kWh is we talked to some service providers, like for Tesla used to give away electricity. You just park and you're supposed to roll off. They were finding people plugging into their DC fast and then hopping on an airplane because they just looked at that thing. I mean, that's the kind of behavior ultimately you can drive unless you have an incentive to kick them off that. But I would say even though the California law allows to do idling charges, so if you're at 100%, you're no longer charging and you're just sitting in there, then you can charge a fee. even though it's kWh, to try to encourage that. But what it doesn't address is what I call soft idling, that 80 to 100% that can triple the time because people, I'm still charging and it's not my fault. It's just charging at a triple, even though, there's a fire hose there and I'm just taking a straw to it. But I'm still officially charging. So, but at the end of the day, I don't know if I'm right or wrong with applying a per minute to Texas. But I think what Texas' approach is, let the market decide. If someone else wants to do kWh right next to our per minute, people with gas stations, they know, and there's apps to show, what's cheap. They'll figure out. And ultimately, what they're charging has wheels on it. If they don't like your business model, they might go across the street to the one that they do like. So that's kind of my general policy advice on rates in general. Is I think let the market decide and let it shake out a little bit more. I don't think we're there yet to mandate. And then also, when you look at all the line items of the kWh, it gets really confusing for a lot of customers. And so one of our tenets is always try to keep things simple. People can understand. Some of them, it's hard to believe that unlimited charging at level 2 is $4.17 a month. They can wrap their head. You just go and you just plug in and you're going to get a line item on your electric utility bill for $4.17. And you just charge all you want at public charging. That's really simple for people to understand. And I would say that's also simple for people to understand is the 0.21 cents a minute. Every minute you're on there, you're ticking another 21 cents. And people can understand.
Yeah, absolutely. Going back to your commercial rates, that it sounds like it's fixed primarily, and there's no variable component. Do the fleets kind of sign up for a specific kW ceiling or kWh ceiling, or is it the same rate for everybody? Could you expand a little bit on how the rate is structured?
So if you want to set up a EV charging infrastructure or EV charging for your fleet, and behind the meter, I believe the threshold is 90% or more of the electrons is fueling electric vehicles. So 10% could be lighting or whatnot, but it's got to be obviously a significant part for EVs. You can apply for our pilot tariff, our fleet and infrastructure pilot tariff. We have capped it to a certain amount of customers, but we haven't filled that amount yet. So that's one way as a pilot we can manage risk is we're going to cap it and then we're going to get data and see does it scale. Once again, we're going back to Essayons. Let's let us try and then let's see what the behavior is driving. But what it fundamentally does is that pilot tariff moves the energy charge, the traditional variable charge of energy, to 0.0, and it replaces it with a fixed fee. But if you don't like the pilot tariff, you can be a regular commercial account. And generally it's what we call an S3 commercial account. So it's really up to you. It's just one more choice. And what we found with customers has been a strategy for AE overall, even though we're the sole provider of electric service in our territory and have been since 1895. I mean, there's a little history there and there's a lot of value by being served from public power. We also know people so even though at the end of the day, the electricity is provided and the service provided by Austin Energy, is you have a lot of different programs. So with fleet, you can choose, okay, do I just want to be a traditional commercial or do I want to do this pilot rate? Also, do I want to subscribe to Green Choice? So 100% of the energy is supporting West Texas wind. That's another choice you have. And then as a customer, do you want to just charge it at home? We have a pilot called EV360, which is unlimited off-peak charging at home, and it enrolls you in the public charging. That's another choice you have. Or you can enroll your home in Green Choice if you want to go green. Or you want to put solar. We have great rebates for solar. And so we just have a bevy of programs. So you have a ton of choice. I'd say more choice than a lot of investor-owned utility territories because we have so many innovative programs that customers, I like that, I don't like that, and I want to be 100% green now. Or community solar, maybe it's not West Texas wind I want to support. I want to buy into a community solar plant that's localized, larger rooftop, and in one case, ground-mounted solar. Buy into that and get into a fixed rate. So I think we have a lot of different choices of programs here in Austin Energy. And that's part of, I would say, what's the driver is. And then we internalize that data and customer feedback, see what is resonating and what isn't, what's working, what's not. And the winners we scale and ramp up. And the ones that aren't getting the uptake, well, then we cancel those or they die in the vine.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic. The portfolio approach and a lot of trying and a lot of experimentation. That's really wonderful. And I'm sure others will also learn from what you've learned as EVs spread around the country. Switching gears a little bit to infrastructure and to how we power all these EVs. Sometimes we hear that some fleets want to have a microgrid to as a backup or as primary source of power. Some fleets want to have a fair amount of solar on premises, or they install big batteries. Curious how you see this in your service territory, if you see a lot of it or not much, and generally, is that something you're in favor of or against?
Well, so here in Austin, when we see fleets, because ultimately, yes, what is the problem you're trying to solve? So here it's reliability and resiliency are probably the two drivers of microgrid and other technologies. Reliability, meaning it's up when you need it. Resiliency is how quickly does it come back up when you have a major event. So for one is, so we did a microgrid project called Austin Shines. I was the principal investigator of, and Shines stood for Sustainable Holistic Integration of Energy Storage and PV Solar, based on the U.S. Department of Energy Shines acronym and program. So thank you, DOE, for that grant support, as well as Texas. And so we are by no means opposed and think there is a lot of business case in microgridding technologies. As part of the Shines deliverables, we did publish over 500 pages of white papers that really drive down into the business case as well as the technologies. We created something called the DER value wheel. Distributed energy resources is a core kind of component or technology of microgrids. And we identified 19 value cases and field tested 6 of Shines, and that included vehicle to grid. So we've been studying it and very interested in that as a technology for a while now. That the Shines has been fully deployed years ago now. So that's something we launched, 7-8 years ago. So it's not like, a lot of people are getting into this microgrids, but we've already put a lot of thought into it. And here's what we found in Shines is the technology readily exists and it continues to get better. It's the business cases and how you're going to have a sustainable business case, which is still the challenge, especially in Texas, because our electric rates is so inexpensive compared to other areas. A lot of the Shines business cases and technologies could pan out immediately in like Hawaii and maybe even California, because their rates on average are something. But when you're offsetting an already affordable rate, it's really about defining that business case. So that's why Shines wasn't just a lot of technologies to include residential, commercial, and grid scale technologies. It was also business cases for residential, commercial, and grid scale, and not just for the utility, which a lot of utilities, when they get in microgridding, they do what's called direct utility control, DUC. They like control everything. Shines also had what does a third-party aggregator look like? So instead of us doing direct utility control of all the commercial battery assets, for example, we had a third-party aggregator do that. We also had a third-party aggregator participate in the residential side. So I would say that's the biggest barrier right now is the sustainable business case. But I would also go back again to the outcome. What we find when we talk to customers, let's say here at Austin Energy, a dual feed gets them all the outcomes and much quicker than microgrid. Maybe dual feeds aren't available in every territory and everywhere, but when you're talking about resiliency and reliability and the math behind it and the metrics, a lot of utility metrics are around SAIDI and SAIFI. That's kind of how we measure our reliability. Is dual feed is the way to go. So we'll have customers talk about dual feed. For example, Cap Metro going dual feed with their electric bus depot. It's also their dispatch center as a way to get that reliability and resiliency off a program that's not necessarily microgridding, but I would say the outcome can be the same, if not better, and deployment and costs can be.
Yeah. And for those in the audience who may not be familiar, I think dual feeding refers to pulling power from two different areas of the grid so that if one branch goes down for whatever reason, the other one is still available. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. Generally, you have a major outage, it would be at the feeder level. Typically, outages is at the transformer level, which is affecting a few homes. And the two biggest charges of outages is a tree limb hitting a line due to wind or ice or whatever, or a squirrel or some other animal getting involved. And so that is a transformer when that comes incapacitated. So that can affect generally just a few homes. A feeder is generally a much bigger space. And statistically, the odds of 2 feeders going down at the exact same time is a really remote possibility. And so when you look at the outcomes and designing a resilient location, a reliable, resilient location, you can just look as, well, what does the grid give you out of the box? And that's where you look at SAIDI and SAFE. And then, well, what happens? How much can I really, get even better by being serviced by 2 separate feeders? Because mathematically, the chances of 2 separate feeders going down goes significantly down. So you're not going to be part of a larger impact. So your whole neighborhood might be out, but if you're dual feeder and you're getting it from another area, you're still on. But there's also, on-site backup generation. State legislature recently passed something that's referred to as the HEB bill to allow grocery stores during outages to participate in basically third-party programs that can provide the backup generation. They can participate on the market to help subsidize the business model, but during outages, they have the generation on site. So there's some different policy things going on. And once again, when you look at that legislation, it wasn't about the technology. It was about a sustainable business model. How can a third-party aggregator get involved and provide a lot of this type of backup generation for a large fleet of customers, and then also participate in a potential market operations to help subsidize the cost for the customer. Yeah. And there's pros and cons to that policy and programs, but we're an EV show. But that's those are the type of things coming out to help address reliability and resiliency. And that to me is really what you're doing with a microgridding or islanding or other type of technologies.
Yeah. And while we're in kind of utility land and transformers and power lines, what's your view on V2G or V2X more broadly? I know that I think these terms kind of became more front of mind, at least to me and to the folks I talked to, when Ford came out and said that the F-150 Lightning could do a version of V2X, which of course has asterisks and caveats to that. How do you see this broad space? And in particular, do you see utilities taking the lead, OEMs taking the lead, or perhaps is it not even worth investing all that much money, time, and effort? Curious to hear your perspective.
Yeah, so here I think we have a little more history than most, because vehicle to grid was always a goal of the Austin Shines project. We removed it during negotiation of DOE, but ended up bringing it back during the project scope. And one of the things happened over the time, one of the initial barriers was car manufacturers across the board said if you use your car battery for anything else than moving the tires, you can completely void your warranty. Right. So once again, as a barrier, I had the opportunity to lead a small delegation to Tokyo and talk to Nissan Global about what V2G means to the utility and what it really means to our programs. And a major V2G program in Texas is called 4CP. And ultimately what that means is we're really looking at displacing 20% of the battery approximately 20 times a year. Once they started hearing the metrics that we weren't doing deep charges daily, and that wasn't the mechanism, they ended up coming back and visiting us in Austin, Texas. And at that meeting, they announced moving with the next generation of Leaf, we're going to remove that barrier now that we understand it better. And they did. So we used that's one of the reasons I used the Nissan Leaf as a 10 kW bidirectional flow as part of our residential PV and energy storage integration as part of Shines. And so that's just kind of giving the context. And once again, what we found out is the technology works really well. It's very responsive, but some of the product lines, specifically at that time, the device that did the 10 kW bidirectional flow was a little more commercial oriented than it looked a little bulky in the garage. It looked like a big refrigerator, decibel levels a little high, still a little clunky, but that technology is already getting. So let's move forward to today. I think we cannot underestimate the power of the F-150 brand coming out and actively promoting during a storm, power your home with our truck. Go to a work site, power your work site with our truck. They are brilliant at marketing and knowing customer expectations. And if you go to the Ford F-150 website, the actual Ford website, the very first feature is the protect yourself during a storm. Number 2 is power your work site. Then they get in the traditional things they normally talk about as horsepower equivalents and towing and that kind of stuff that sells trucks. So they've kind of gone all in, and that's them listening to their customer. I think it also resonates very well in Texas, in the Texas market and recent storms, as a way to, people buying the truck. Not only am I buying my work truck, I'm also buying an investment for my family to keep my home powered if we have another winter storm and the grid isn't able to keep up with me and what my family needs. So who's responsible? I think at the end of the day, I think the OEMs, the car manufacturers, are ultimately going to push it over the line in customer behavior and customer expectations. But the utilities need to be heavily involved in to make sure that's integrated in the most optimal way onto the grid. And then there's also potential safety concerns of how that is integrated. During outages, when you have remote power, it's very important you don't have what we call reactive power that could potentially electrocute or harm individuals trying to repair your neighborhood. And so how that's installed is very important to us. And that's generally managed through electrical permitting and permitting processes, et cetera. So it's something, but I would say, so it's up to the utility and the car manufacturers to safe and permitting to safely implement that technology. I think vehicle to home is going to be the winner out of the gate. And then due to the ability for companies like Ford to properly market it, and that will lead demand. But I think there is a lot more business case for fleets to also participate in those programs. But yeah, we think there's a ton of opportunity. When we field tested it years ago, the main barrier was the business case. Mm-hmm. But the thing about a generator's business case doesn't have to pan out month over month and return on investment. It is the 1 week you have power and your whole neighborhood is out. You've now made all your money and then some. So it's more like insurance. A generator is more like insurance, where a lot of the V2G is more like ROI. And those are two different things. So once again, you have to decide up front, what is your outcome? Is your outcome is to have safe, reliable generation services as a backup for you and your family? Or are you trying to make money in some sort of daily market or some sort of market participation, as a fleet? So once you decide what your goal is, then I think you can easily successfully have the backup generation capabilities if that's your idea of success. I think there's still work to happen in market regulations and participation for the business case to pin out if you're trying to make money on your backup.
Yeah. We definitely see customers trying to optimize their charging time, right, with TOU rates. V2X is a whole other level of complexity. If you look at the business case, especially in the residential side, that gets really complicated. Do you see customer enthusiasm for programs like this, or does it kind of fly over their head?
Well, you have the power users where they really want to do it. But then you have to look at to scale. So we have a time of use EV charging pilot rate called EV360, and we've learned a lot. And it's fully subscribed now, but we have a waiting list of people who are interested in. And what we've learned from it is this: we also, prior to EV360, because that was based on learnings from an ARPA-E grant. ARPA-E is the DOE, more the innovation side. And we participated in an ARPA-E grant on demand response. So high level is this. I think demand response, so one-way curtailment of when you charge, gets the utility and the overall community goals 80% there. The two-way bidirectional flow, vehicle to X, is the remaining 20%. So you can accomplish a lot when you're looking at overall goals of reliability, resiliency, affordability, climate change by just having demand response programs. What we found with the consumer side is this. On our ARPA-E grant, we paired it with air conditioning load, which is the traditional utility way, especially in Sunbelt utilities, to curb demand response through air conditioning load. And what we found is we got the expected amount of opt-outs when people got a little warm. Opt-out means they turn the AC back down. So I don't care, I'm 1 degree warm, and they opt out. We had 0 opt-outs for shifting the car load. So what we found is people are much more willing to have their car time shifted a few hours back or later in the evening when your hot summer afternoon starts cooling down. more so than the traditional way utilities do it, is with thermostats. So there's a lot more willingness for customers to fully participate and not opt out of shifting EV load. So one is I think there's more opportunities there based on customer behavior. And then with EV 360, how that program works is off peak, your energy charge is 0.0. On peak, if you charge during peak, it's 41 cents. So huge difference.
Yeah.
And it is, I'm going to say it's $30 a month. So that's all you can charge at home off peak. And then all you can charge public on the level 2 network 24/7, 365 for $30 a month. What we found with our participants, it works 100% of the time with 99% of the people. There is one guy who just doesn't care and charges during that 40. He's basically our test case of, hey, we got to make sure the 41 cents thing still works. Everyone else knows, and they just set up their car once and they fire and forget and they just don't do it. But we have one guy who just doesn't care. I need to do a deep dive with that one guy. And it is a guy. I'm not just saying guy, you know who it is. I need to have a sit down, understand the thought and behavior. But what we've shown is you can definitely shift load. And I would say you can shift load with much more customer acceptance than the traditional way we shift load is climate.
That's wonderful. That's great. I think, this covers a pretty wide range of what I wanted to discuss. Are there other things, Karl, that are near and dear to your heart that you want to share with our audience as far as Austin's work in the space?
Well, there's a lot near and dear my heart. I mean, I mentioned we have 25 active initiatives, and it's almost like having 25 kids. You don't have a favorite. But I will just end on, I guess, one thought that I think every utility should be thinking about as you're rolling out these programs. We're also seeing a lot of focus on this with some of these larger grants coming out in federal programs, the IRA, et cetera, and the NEVI plans and the Texas NEVI plans. Equity. Let's talk about equity and affordability and maybe end on that. Because we launched our overall program 11 years ago, and I got to co-found the team. It's been just a great journey. And about maybe 6 years ago, we were able to formalize a role in a program called EVs for Everyone. And that was just an equity-based program of how we can make sure that our low income and historically underserved community isn't last in the line to reap the benefits of transportation electrification, how we put in front of the line. And so one that evolves nuances of every program we have. For example, working with ZappyRide and the Buyer's Guide, it was very important from an equity position to have used car dealerships and used cars online. We just didn't want to use it. We wanted to show the $7,000, $8,000 used Nissan Leaf community. We wanted that online. That was important. So that's a thought where the equity component, EVs for Everyone, plays into a program like the Buyer's Guide. But it also has its own standalone to include, like when we did EVs for Schools, which is a great outreach program for kids 6 through 12, 3 different tiers, to learn about sustainable transportation. We launched at 4 schools. All 4 schools were Title I schools, which meant the majority of the kids are from low-income households. It's now in 164 Central Texas schools, and it's provided nationally. A bunch of other communities started bringing it online because we put that training in public domain. And so I would say this is, when you approach equity, I've seen some very well-meaning conversations by very smart people look at, for example, I have this national database. It shows where rural poor folks live. So let's have a plan that puts charging stations with where poor people live. Because statistically, I can show that. My feedback to that has been, I think that's fine, but I think if someone is going to put in infrastructure and you're saying you're doing it as an equity play, you need a commitment, a letter of support from the community you're saying you're trying to serve. Is, we understand what this is and we want this and we like this and we like these people. Because what happens if you build it hoping they will come, especially in lower income areas in Austin, that's historically been our East Austin Crescent. If you just build it and just hope they'll come, at best, they ignore it. At worst, they think it's a form of gentrification. That's not for us. That's for rich people moving. So I think you could have a very well-intended meeting by putting infrastructure and saying, well, we have the data and we know this census tract and that's where we're going to put it. But unless you involve the community and here's how I'd say you approach the community. And I had to learn a lot of this from our equity lead, Amy, And for example, when we hired someone, it was more important we hired someone who was more involved and knowledgeable with the community than a utility person. Because a utility person will train the community, here's how the programs work, and here's how you can learn from it. A community person, so prior to joining us, 14 years at the largest nonprofit in Austin, Meals on Wheels. So the last 14 years literally bringing food to the community we now want to serve with public transit. And so now she's coming with us and having meetings as, here's what we think, what do you think? And they'll always, but that would work, or what about electric bikes? And we have this over here. And what about jobs for the kids? And can we get them in? They will give you ideas that you didn't think about, but that meet a real need. So then you listen to that, you internalize it, you do a pilot and program, and then you launch that. And then you look at the metrics and you see what hits and what doesn't. But I would just, end on this is, if you're doing something and you're saying this is an equity play and we're taking these funds, I think unless you have letters of support from the folks you're saying you're meeting the need of that say they understand it and they want it, you are missing the mark. I would say you're failing out of the gate unless you take that extra step. I know it's harder, especially for national rollouts. You just wanted to be data driven and you just canvas this whole area and it's done. I would say every community is different and they're all going to have their different needs. And you have to go on a listening session and understand to see or just sometimes it's just a tweak. Well, not at this corner, but if you put it over there, because you might find something that surprises you with a minor program tweak. You now make it their idea. The best idea is the community you're trying to serve, that it's their idea.
Yeah.
And you are just there to facilitate it. And that by default is how you start getting into having a successful.
It really resonates. I remember an anecdote where I heard about, I think there was a charging station rollout in some of the poor areas of Oakland, California. And I remember stories that the local population was just vandalizing the chargers, to your point about not understanding what they're for and seeing it as gentrification as opposed to something that could be helpful.
Yeah. And here in rural Texas, I would even go one step further. I talked to some of my friends at rural utilities, even putting in smart grid technologies on the poles, that looks a little different. Within months, they get shot at. And I would say not only in rural community, you will get your infrastructure will be shot at by the locals if they aren't the ones wanting it and protecting it. That's just, you're going to have so much outages due to vandalism and in Texas shooting up that it's going to be really hard to have a reliable business case unless you do it in a smart, thoughtful way and you get a local champion there, especially the host and the property owner, to just say, I own this and I want this here on your side.
Well, Karl, it's been a fantastic conversation. I'll pass it back to Cameron in a second, but where can people go to learn more about Austin Energy and all your programs? Is it all on austinenergy.com? We
have two websites. We have the one we've been talking about a lot that we collaborated with y'all on, ev.austinenergy.com. That's the buyer's guide. And then we have all our programs and program information on pluginaustin.com. We'll take you straight to our site. And then I too try to update program information on LinkedIn as well. So feel free to connect with me via LinkedIn when we have a new rollout of some sort. I generally also post and share there.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Karl. Let me pass the mic back to Cameron, who will wrap this up and take us to the next step.
Yeah. Thank you, Karl, Olivier. That was a great conversation. I think it's very apparent that you guys are leading by example. That's one of the most important things when it comes to new technology. So kudos to you guys. It's been impressive to see the footprint that you guys are having on the EV world, and even going to Electrify Expo. I mean, seeing your guys' presence there was awesome to see in such a large scale event. So keep up the good work. And again, thank you for your time.